I'd like to call JLARC to order. We have a really, for me, at least fascinating meeting because we're going to be doing our plan as well as the controller's plans. And if you read the background materials, it gives you a little taste of what both groups are going to be doing over the next year, as well as a little look back with the controller. So with that, let's get started, Hal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. Welcome to the first JLARC Commission meeting of 2023. I'm Hal Greer, the Staff Director. Madam Chair, we're going to have two items on the agenda this morning. First, we'll present the JLARC work plan for the 2023 calendar year. And next, the Auditor of Public Accounts and her staff will present their work plan for the coming fiscal year, as well as results from some of their work from the past year. Madam Chair, now to the presentation of the JLARC work plan. You may recall that it's typical practice for us to present the work plan at the May meeting of JLARC each year to give the Commission a fuller understanding of the work that we're undertaking in the current year on the studies that you have directed. This meeting also serves as an opportunity for members of the Commission to provide input on particular issues related to the topics that we're undertaking, as well as to ask any questions you have about the studies that we're doing. With the exception of the SOQ funding formula study, which was directed by joint resolution, the studies that we're currently conducting were directed by this Commission last fall. Each of the associate directors will give you a brief overview of the studies under their supervision, and then the project leaders for each study will stand up and give you a brief summary for each of the studies. We'll also share with you our ongoing oversight that we'll be undertaking this year. Justin Brown will lead off. Justin?
Thanks, Hal. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As Hal said, my name is Justin Brown. I'm one of JLARC's Associate Directors. And before I bring up the project leaders, I wanted to give you some detail about something that's coming up soon, and that's that SOQ funding formula study that Hal mentioned. You might remember from our last JLARC meeting in December, we gave you a status report kind of foreshadowing some of the topics that we're going to be addressing in that report and some of the, I think, potentially critical implications that might have, both for K-12 policy, but also for just funding generally. In part because of the dollars involved, even a fairly modest change to that formula will need to be very carefully deliberated by you, the governor, and obviously there's a broad network of local stakeholders in the school divisions and local government. So given the complexity of the formula itself, the breadth and the thoroughness of our review and how important that formula is to education, our final report's going to be pretty long, and the presentation we give to you at that July meeting probably will not be a short, breezy affair. But it's important and it's technical. So just wanted to kind of foreshadow that for you. So with that, I'm going to ask the project leaders of the three studies I'm supervising to come up in order, and they'll just give you a few minutes on each of their research plans for their projects. Thank you. Mark?
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Members of the Commission. Joining me on this study are Eric Beecroft, Sarah Berde-Sachs, Sam Lieseman, and Mitch Perry. We are in the second year of this study, and as Justin just mentioned, you will have our findings in July. This study is looking at the cost of public education and implications for SOQ funding, including if and how to change the SOQ funding formula. As you all know, the main way the state funds public education is through the SOQ formula. The formula is very complex and takes into consideration factors like school division staffing levels, the cost of salaries and benefits, and each local government's ability to pitch in funding. The SOQ formula allocated $6.8 billion in state funds to school divisions last fiscal year, which was the vast majority of direct aid. The SOQs also require minimum local contributions. In practice, nearly all localities contributed more than their minimum, with last year's contribution averaging 90% more than was required. These are our study issues. You saw these last year, so I won't belabor them. The upshot here is we're looking broadly at public education funding in Virginia, including every aspect of SOQ funding. This slide shows our research activities. I won't belabor this either. But I will pause to say that we have been very grateful to the many educators from across Virginia who have taken the time to participate in our study, including in our interviews and work groups. We have also done extensive data analyses and conducted a very rigorous review of the current formula and how it works, including developing our own version of the SOQ funding model. Madam Chair, unless there are any questions, I can turn the podium over.
Are there questions? Yes, Delegate Ware.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I note on the study issues, you note that you're looking at how does K-12 funding compare to other states and relevant benchmarks. To what extent have you looked at other states to see how their formula, how are they set up their formula compares to us, and are there relevant things? Are you finding there are specific states that may have something to show us?
Delegate, yes, we have looked at that. There's actually a publicly available right now breakdown of 50 states funding on the Education Commission for the states, to the states. And one of the things you'll see there is that Virginia is in a minority of states. We're one of 11 states that use this, I'd say, more complex staffing-based formula to determine funding. Majority of states, I believe it's 31 or 32, use a student-based formula. So our formula design is not an outlier, but we're in a minority of states that have our formula designed in the current way.
So, and that's the Education Commission of the States is the source for that?
I believe so. Let me check with my, yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you,
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Orrock.
In the interviews you've had with some of the local school divisions, will that enable you, as you produce your report, to share certain innovations or efficiencies that some school divisions have been able to come up with so that we might be able to do more with the existing resources if that's shared among the school divisions?
Delegate, our focus has been more on the funding side than how the funding has been used. We certainly have touched on efficiencies in our discussions with folks, but our focus will be more on the funding needed than how it is used.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Delegate Plum.
Madam Chair, I was wondering, in terms of the SOQ, do you start off on the premise that the SOQ is adequate for funding public education, or do you question what the SOQ standards ought to be? I've noticed in the time I've been here, the SOQs tend to go up and down based on how much money we have to spend. And I wonder where you use as a baseline for the SOQs.
Delegate, that was one of the questions we were specifically asked to look at in our study resolution is what is the actual, I can't remember the exact quote from the mandate at this point, but it's something to the effect of what is the, quote, actual cost of education. And so that is something we've been asked to look at, and we attempt to estimate that in several ways using benchmarks, comparisons to other states, as well as some other methods that we developed and borrowed from other researchers in this area.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will turn the podium over to Lauren Excel. Lauren is leading our review of the K-12 teacher pipeline.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As Mark said, I'm Lauren Excel, and I'll be leading our review of the supply of qualified K-12 teachers. The team for this study includes myself, Eric Beecroft, Laura White, and Christine Wolf. We plan to share our findings for the study with you this coming September. Our study resolution directs us to review the adequacy of the supply of qualified public K-12 teachers in Virginia. Specifically, we'll be taking a look at current teacher supply and demand figures, factors driving the decline in teacher supply, the state's teacher licensure process, and ways the state can maintain and increase the supply of qualified teachers. Last year, you may remember that we studied the pandemic's impact on the public K-12 education system. One of the key findings from our study was that some divisions are struggling to hire enough teachers. As this figure shows, the extent to which divisions are experiencing teacher vacancies varies. As of fall 2021, nearly three-quarters of divisions had 5% or less of their teacher positions vacant. The remaining divisions had over 5% of their teacher positions vacant, with 6 divisions reporting vacancies over 10%. Our study last year also found that the number of newly licensed teachers was not keeping up with the number of teachers leaving, resulting in an overall decrease in the teacher workforce. We will be updating these figures as part of our current study, and especially if the trends continue, these figures highlight the importance of our state's efforts to prepare teachers. Which brings us to the topic of our current study for this year of the teacher pipeline. To better understand what the supply of teachers may be going forward, we are identifying and assessing the various pathways that exist in Virginia to prepare teachers. Together, these pathways make up Virginia's K-12 teacher pipeline. To provide a bit of background on the teacher pipeline, it is fairly complex. There are at least 8 different ways that individuals can pursue teaching. For example, a fairly common pathway involves individuals completing an undergraduate or graduate preparation program at a higher education institution to become fully licensed. In addition, there are multiple state, local, public, and private entities that contribute to the pipeline and affect how many teachers are produced. We will share more detailed information on Virginia's teacher pipeline in September. There are 4 main study issues that our team will focus on as part of this study, which include identifying which programs form the state's teacher pipeline and how many teachers they produce, determining how effective the programs are at creating enough well-prepared teachers, assessing how, if at all, the state's teacher licensure process affects individuals' ability to become licensed teachers, and finally, identifying how the state can help increase the supply of K-12 teachers. This and my next slide show the various research activities we will complete for this study. A few things that I'll highlight for the sake of time are that we will be collecting and analyzing information from teacher preparation programs to understand how they work and common barriers individuals face to completing preparation programs. We will analyze Virginia's teacher licensure process, including how long it takes people to get through the process, and how, if at all, the process affects their employment opportunities. And finally, we will be conducting several surveys to collect feedback from divisions, first-year teachers, and individuals who are licensed but not currently teaching to understand how Virginia could increase the supply of well-prepared teachers. And Madam Chair, I'll pause here for any questions about this study.
Thank you, Lauren. Are there questions?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Orick.
The one item I didn't see up there, so you're not going to be getting input from other states as to their licensure process? I didn't see that mentioned.
Delegate Orick, that's a very good question. We will be getting some input from other states. We've started speaking with a few, mainly to figure out what innovative things they're doing to help solve this problem.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Anecdotally, what I'm hearing is not only a problem with the pipeline, but sustaining folks in the classroom who are there. Will there be some element of that, review of that as you go forward?
Delegate Ware, yes, we will be looking at teacher retention as well. We know that's a big piece of the puzzle. That's something that the COVID study last year that one of our JLARC teams worked on did focus on pretty heavily. So we'll be building on what we learned from that study and also collecting feedback to see to what extent that still is a common challenge among divisions.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to that, will you be looking at the whole recertification process for teachers, how effective that is, and so forth? That'll be dovetailing with that, correct?
Yes, absolutely, Delegate. We'll be looking at the licensure process, both for individuals who are just getting their teacher license for the first time, but also those going through the renewal process.
It's been my observation over many decades that as women have had more opportunities in other fields, which are more remunerative and in many ways equally satisfying, the numbers of teachers is going down. And I'm wondering if there's any way to get at that aspect.
So, Madam Chair, Senator Howell, we will be looking at certainly how the composition of the teacher workforce has changed. So we're very interested in just looking at the various demographic characteristics of the teacher workforce. We'll see how the percentage of women in the teacher workforce has changed in recent years. We're going to be speaking with divisions to see what common barriers are for different demographic groups to be in their current teacher workforce, and certainly interested in learning about that piece. Anything that we can do to help ensure that the population of teachers is as diverse as possible, represents the students that they're teaching, that's something we'll be looking at.
Thank you. Yes. Delegate Byron.
Yes, I just wanted, you may have mentioned it, but will the data, the extent of the data include teachers that have transferred but not exited the workplace? And also, will you have had the opportunity to interview any that have left that maybe weren't full retirement, or those that are, as to why they left?
Yes, Delegate Byron, we are going to be attempting to survey individuals who have a current teacher's license but are not teaching. That's something we might not get a lot of responses to, but we're interested to see if they transferred into another profession, why that's the case, and what might entice them to come back. And also individuals who just are not working in any profession right now at all, but they have a teacher's license.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn the podium over to Joe.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Good morning. My name is Joe McMahon, and I'm the project leader for our review of public defenders, court-appointed attorneys, and Commonwealth's attorneys. Working with me on this study are Kate Agnelli, Scarlett Saunders, and Brittany Utz. We're directed to review the adequacy, availability, and compensation of legal defense for indigent criminal defendants, which includes the state system of court-appointed defense attorneys and the system of public defenders. There's also a component of this study pertaining to Commonwealth's attorneys. We're asked to assess their staffing levels and compensation. And finally, we're asked to evaluate the policies of providing criminal defendants with counsel for their first appearance and holding a bail hearing on the same day as that first appearance. For some quick background, as you know, we have an adversarial legal system that depends on a sufficient number of qualified attorneys to act in a prosecution role for the state and a defense role for the accused. The U.S. Constitution guarantees criminal defendants this assistance of counsel. The state provides indigent defendants with counsel through the public defender system or by appointing a private attorney. Looking at the scale of the prosecution and defense systems, Virginia has 120 Commonwealth's attorney offices that employ about 1,250 individuals made up of prosecuting attorneys and support staff. The state's public defender system has 28 offices that serve 56 localities, which employ a little over 400 staff made up of defense attorneys and their support. The state also has about 1,500 private attorneys that are registered and certified to be appointed by the court to represent indigent defendants. They primarily serve in localities without public defender coverage or cases where the public defender's office has a conflict of interest. The state spends about $190 million, or the state spent about $190 million in FY22 on publicly funded attorneys working criminal cases. This figure shows spending over time when adjusting for inflation. State spending on Commonwealth's attorneys' operations was $79 million in FY22 and has generally grown and kept pace with inflation. State funding for the public defense system was about $66 million in FY22. It flows through the Virginia Indigent Defense Commission to the public defender offices. Funding's increased there in recent years for new positions in existing offices and for opening and staffing new offices in Chesterfield and Prince William. And finally, state spending on reimbursements paid to court-appointed attorneys was about $47 million this past year. It has steadily declined relative to inflation because the rates paid to attorneys has not increased in about 2 decades, and because fewer criminal charges were being heard by the courts during the pandemic. The main issues we'll be looking at in this study include whether the state has the right number of public defenders, court-appointed attorneys, and Commonwealth attorneys to adequately handle workloads, whether public defenders and court-appointed attorneys provide quality representation to their clients, how many additional, if any, public defenders and public defender offices should the state consider to ensure adequate and effective representation, a comparison of compensation between the different types of attorneys, and we'll look at those 2 policy considerations, those being whether the state should provide defendants with counsel that is appointed and present for the first appearance, and/or whether to hold the bail hearing on the same day as the first appearance. This will include looking at the key implementation considerations of each. Our main research activities are here. They include interviews with staff serving the respective attorney roles, comparing Virginia's system of indigent defense to other states, comparing compensation between each group of attorneys as well as to other attorneys in the public and private sector. We'll assess attorney quality by looking at the time and effort they put into cases and quantifying case outcomes through extensive data analysis. And we'll also look at attorney workload. That includes using the findings of a pending study being conducted by the Comp Board, which will assess Commonwealth's attorney staffing and workload. We also plan to partner with the National Center for State Courts to update a Virginia Public Defender workload analysis that they originally completed back in 2010. And then finally, we'll survey the major stakeholder groups. That concludes my section. I can pause here.
Questions? Don't see any.
Easy enough. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Tracy.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Tracy Smith. I'm one of JLARC's Associate Directors, and I have 2 studies under my supervision this year. Back in November, the Commission considered a study of self-sufficiency programs in the state and a study of child care availability, accessibility, and affordability as 2 different study topics. And then the more that we talked about it, both at the subcommittee level and the staff level, we realized that these topics are so interrelated that it would make sense to make them one study. And so we are going to brief that study to you in October of this year. That's being led by Stephanie Papps. And then also in November, you all asked us to continue our work in the behavioral health area. As you may recall, we did a comprehensive study of Virginia's community services boards last year. And so following that, you all asked us to look at, conduct a comprehensive study of the state's 9 state psychiatric hospitals. And so we will be conducting that this year, briefing that to you in December. And Drew Dickinson is the project leader for that study. So I will turn it over now to Stephanie and Drew to describe their studies to you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As Tracy said, my name is Stephanie Papps, and I'm the project leader for the self-sufficiency and child care study that we'll be briefing at the October Commission meeting. Kate Hopkins, Dylan Wild, and Mitch Perry are working alongside me on this study. This study was directed by a Commission resolution you adopted in November last year. The resolution directs us to study the effectiveness of the state's assistance programs at helping their clients achieve self-sufficiency and to assess the barriers that participants face in achieving self-sufficiency. Additionally, the study mandate directs us to study the availability and affordability of childcare by assessing the supply and demand for childcare, evaluating the barriers to providing childcare services, including state regulations, and assessing the barriers that families face in finding and affording childcare. The state provides financial assistance to eligible low-income families through 3 federally funded programs. First is the Temporary Aid to Needy Families Program, or TANF, which provides cash aid and employment services and supports to certain low-income families. Next is the Supplemental Nutritional Aid Program, or SNAP, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program, which provides cash vouchers to low-income individuals to use for purchasing food. And finally, there's the Child Care Subsidy Program, which provides cash vouchers that eligible families use to purchase child care. Virginia spends $3.5 billion annually on these 3 programs, and much of that spending is federal block grants. Enrollment in these programs grew during and since the pandemic, and the federal government required states to make changes to both the TANF program and the SNAP program when the pandemic began, and these changes are only being reversed since the beginning of 2023. For example, in TANF, the work requirements and some time limits were waived between March of 2020 and January 2023. And in SNAP, the average monthly benefit was nearly doubled until March. In March of this year, the SNAP benefits returned to normal levels, going from an average benefit of around $482 per family per month to around $247 per family per month. Turning then to childcare, prior studies, including JLARC's 2005 self-sufficiency study, have identified childcare as one of the primary barriers that individuals face to gaining and then maintaining employment. When parents can't find childcare or they can't afford it, they may be forced to reduce their work hours, opt for lower paying jobs, or drop out of the workforce altogether. This is especially true for women. National research has shown that maternal labor force participation is lower in areas without adequate access to childcare. In Virginia, 70% of children under age 6 live in households where all parents work, and therefore they're assumed to need some form of childcare. However, finding any available childcare, especially for a younger child, is reportedly very difficult, especially in the past couple of years. While many childcare providers may have closed briefly during the pandemic, most reopened, but because of staffing challenges that they've faced since, many providers have reduced the number of slots they offer or reduced their hours. Even when parents can find an available childcare slot, the cost is often unaffordable. The federal government indicates that affordable childcare should cost no more than 7% of a family's income. Nationally, though, the average family with at least one child under 5 is spending around 13% of their income on childcare, and for low-income families, that can be as high as 20 to 30%. The childcare subsidy can and does reduce childcare costs for low-income families, but finding a provider willing to take the subsidy can sometimes be a challenge. Slide 32 lists out the questions we're planning to address in this study, including how effective are the assistance programs at helping their clients become self-sufficient? Are there some opportunities to make these programs, to more effectively structure these programs, especially when it comes to their coordination with workforce development programs? To what extent are Virginia families able to find and afford childcare, and are there any opportunities for the state to improve access? How, if at all, are the state's childcare regulations impacting childcare access and affordability? And how effective is the childcare subsidy at improving affordability of childcare for its clients? Finally, slide 33 provides a brief description of some of the research activities that we're planning to use for this study, which include analyzing data on a cohort of assistance clients over time to determine how their reliance on benefits, their employment status, and their income changed over time, collecting data from childcare providers on their enrollment, waiting lists, tuition rates, and staffing, interviewing state agency staff, staff at local departments of social services, and childcare providers, and comparing Virginia's programs to those in other states. Madam Chair, that concludes my brief remarks on the self-sufficiency and childcare study, and I'll pause here for any questions.
Questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Delegate Orr.
Madam Chair, will your activities be able to tease out ages of the children as well? In particular, I know there's a challenge at the younger ages while the kids are still in diaper. Will y'all be able to separate that out to show that there may be a more striking challenge for accessibility there?
Delegate Orr, yes, we should be able to tease that out.
Anyone else? Yes, Delegate Byron.
I don't know if you're looking at this, but it was an area that I was hoping to pursue, was the extent of assistance for those that might not be working because of children at home, but could be working and would consider like a certification or a short-term education program that would get them back in the workforce and be able to help with child assistance for those type of education programs.
Delegate Byron. So I think that we will be able to sort of provide a range of, we should be able to provide a range of sort of children that need childcare and sort of the number of families impacted. And that range would include those families where a parent is at home. So we should be able to kind of zero in on sort of how many parents that might be affecting, that they're staying at home for whatever reason, whether it's they can't find childcare or they prefer to stay with their child at home. Right, and so we'll also We're also planning to look at how the coordination with the workforce programs is operating with the assistance programs. So that should help us to get a little bit at that question of, can these assistance programs be providing sort of workforce development services and education and training to those folks that may be staying at home because of childcare challenges or their preferences around childcare.
Yes, follow up.
Just to follow up on that, because I know that as we've looked at trying to get worker participation back since COVID and people have stayed at home with their children and for whatever reason didn't go back to work, I also know that there's a lot of families that it just isn't worthwhile to go to work because of the high cost. So I think making sure we really look at those burdens and regulatory things that might be obstacles to getting more daycare available and lowering those costs would be really helpful.
Yes, Delegate Martin.
Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator McPike, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess one question is looking through the list of study issues, and I'm curious as how or if you would be addressing sort of the supply of available daycare slots and childcare slots. I know in my area, I think the pay for someone deciding to work in childcare is somewhere between like $12.50 and $13.50. I mean, an individual can make more at Sheets than they could watching kids. And so there seems to be a really important question around the economics of childcare right now, because my guess is the pressure is only going to increase and costs going to increase, impacting the rest of these questions of affordability.
Right.
Is there a way you guys can sort of address what's going on in the market and sort of workforce in specifically childcare? And I guess to the earlier question of cohort ages is a really important one of when other opportunities become available. So there's two parts to that, sorry.
Okay. So to start with the question around getting at the supply, we are planning to do a survey of childcare providers to get out how many slots they have available for different ages of children. And we're planning to do that because if we were to just rely on the data from the Department of Education, they license childcare facilities for as many kids as they can fit in the facility, but not necessarily what their staffing is there for. So there's fewer childcare slots than what the DOE data would actually show us. So that's how we're trying to get at that supply question. And we should be able to get at that by a sort of regional level as well as by the ages of kids. So we can see if there's a shortage for younger children versus sort of school-age children. And then with the second question around sort of the economics of childcare and sort of getting at the question of, even though it's very expensive for parents to afford childcare, the wages that are being paid to folks who work in the childcare industry are very low. And so that's something that we're hearing as we're interviewing providers and other stakeholders in childcare as well. And so I think one of the things we're going to look at is what other states have done sort of to address that question to the extent that any states have done anything to address it. But I think that's definitely a problem that is driving a lot of what's going on with childcare.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'll hand it over to Drew Dickinson.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As Tracy and Stephanie mentioned, my name is Drew Dickinson. I'll be leading our review of state psychiatric hospitals. We plan to brief the results of our study to you in December. The resolution for this study directs us to review various aspects of state psychiatric hospitals, including their staffing and space needs, their criteria for admissions and discharges, and the treatment plans that are developed for patients. It also asks us to review patient outcomes and the adequacy of state oversight of state hospitals. As a bit of background, the state operates 9 state psychiatric hospitals, 8 for adults and 1 for children and adolescents. In fiscal year 2021, state hospitals admitted about 7,300 individuals, and that's a substantial increase since 2014. About 3/4 of those admissions were for individuals placed under a civil temporary detention order, and those individuals were determined to be an imminent risk to themselves or to others due to a mental illness. An aspect of Virginia's state hospital system that appears to be unique compared to other states is that Virginia's state hospitals have no control over who is admitted to their facilities. They are required to accept all forensic admissions, such as admissions from jails, as well as civil admissions. Still, not everyone who needs to be admitted is being admitted or being admitted timely. The average wait time for admission to state hospitals in fiscal year 2022 was about 43 hours, according to DBHDS, which operates the state's 9 hospitals. In recent years, DBHDS has reported that state psychiatric hospitals have been operating at or above their maximum capacities, and this has prompted safety concerns for both patients and staff. As we found last year in our study of community services boards, there are some individuals who are admitted to state psychiatric hospitals who do not need that level or type of care. Our team plans to review the magnitude of these inappropriate placements, factors that are contributing to them, and strategies that the state could consider to minimize inappropriate placements in the future. As part of our study, we'll be reviewing whether individuals who need inpatient psychiatric care receive appropriate placements and care in a timely manner, and the extent to which state hospitals are admitting patients who would be more appropriately served elsewhere. We'll also be reviewing the extent to which state psychiatric hospitals are safe, therapeutic, and humane environments, the effectiveness of the discharge planning process, and patient outcomes, such as hospital readmission rates. We'll also be reviewing whether state hospitals have adequate staff and space to provide safe and effective services, as well as the adequacy of state oversight of the state hospitals. And this slide summarizes some of our planned research activities. They include analyses of data on state hospital staffing, capacity, patient characteristics, and patient outcomes, and comparing these aspects to private psychiatric hospitals wherever possible. With the help of a clinical expert, we plan to evaluate the quality of patient treatment plans and services, as well as discharge planning decisions. Our team also plans to review data and documents related to safety, incidents, and human rights violations. We plan to compare Virginia's state psychiatric hospital laws to other states, as well as state hospital patient characteristics to other states. And we will be conducting a lot of interviews with state psychiatric hospital staff and a survey of staff as well, and also interviews with other stakeholders. And Madam Chair, that concludes my brief remarks, but happy to take any questions.
Yes. Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you got 100 people, and you're going to look to see if they can fit into the current facilities, and if they can't, then they're going to go somewhere. Are you going to look at, is there total facilities of whatever kind to take care of that 100 people?
It's a great question, Delegate Wilt. Our study would like to look not just at the state hospitals themselves, but where else these individuals could be served, including the private hospitals. And so we are looking at a systems level, and then within the hospitals, really understanding what do we mean by capacity, and what does the number of beds mean, and helping to articulate that and understand that. So our goal is, yes, to look at where else, whether it's in the state hospitals or elsewhere, individuals could be served that really meets their needs the best.
Delegate Orrock.
Madam Chairman, yes, you may. As y'all are getting the data and you're looking at that average admission wait time, will you be able to tease out kind of what has made the difference between the highs and lows in those admission timeframes to see if there's a particular pattern that we can see that's leading to the lengthier admission times?
Delegate, great question. To my understanding, there is some information about the reasons, for example, why people are waiting long, and I think that is informative, and why are some people waiting particularly long, and that can actually help you understand what services we could get them to maybe help expedite their services. So we should be able to provide some commentary on that, Delegate.
Yes, Senator McPike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess as a follow-up to Delegate Wilk's question, to be more specific, we're sort of in transition to the crisis now model, and we're sort of taking a study and a snapshot of what we've been doing. How is the team going to sort of address, the new additions of crisis receiving centers, crisis stabilization units, to the portfolio of opportunities that are actually closer in communities versus like hours away, and how does it change our costing and our treatment models and response times?
Senator McPike, it's really important context, and so our goal is always to make these studies as useful as we can, and having that. Fortunately, myself and a member of our team were on the CSB study, which looked at some of those services like the residential crisis stabilization units and things that really, as you build them out, you may not need state hospital as many people could maybe be served at those lower levels. And so we should be able to, our recommendation should be able to provide information that has those current developments as background and context, and see if there's anything else that we can do or to help facilitate those other services or anything else out there that we could develop more fully. That's good.
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Austin online. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning. I'm glad you're with us.
Took you by surprise. I have a question. Are we able to distinguish between behavioral health and mental health? And will the opioid abatement dollars allow us to treat people who maybe are not mentally ill but have behavioral health problems? Are we taking the opioid abatement dollars into consideration here when we're doing an analysis of possibly people who have behavioral health issues maybe going to our psychiatric facilities, I guess is my question.
Delegate, that's a good question. What we plan to do is look at the circumstances and the needs of individuals who are coming into the hospitals. And I believe substance abuse disorders would be a piece of that. And so really understanding what their specific needs are, and to the extent we are seeing individuals who are primarily have substance abuse issues, looking at strategies that we could use take on as a state to serve them in a different environment if they do not need that level of care. But we can certainly look into that funding stream, and whether that could be used to help support these alternative placements.
Yes, Madam Chair, follow up.
Yes.
Just a comment. I think that probably there's going to be a lot of treatment care given through the substance abuse and possibly the behavioral health at the opioid abatement level. And I hope we'll look seriously at can maybe possibly that take some of the pressure off of some of the services currently being provided at our mental hospitals. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Further questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Kimberly.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Kimberly Sarte, and I'm JLARC's third Associate Director. The work under my supervision includes the ongoing evaluation and oversight that JLARC provides for the General Assembly, as well as the fiscal analysis services that we provide. So Ellen Miller will be up in a moment to discuss our ongoing evaluation of the state's economic development incentives, and she will also discuss our upcoming study of the Go Virginia program. And then following Ellen, Jamie Bitts will discuss JLARC's oversight of several state agencies, and this will include our review of the enhanced retirement benefits for public safety occupations. Ellen?
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. As Kimberly mentioned, I'm Ellen Miller, and I'm one of JLARC's chief analysts, and I have primary responsibility for our work on economic development. This September, I will present our 7th in-depth evaluation of the state's economic development incentives. This particular report focuses on 9 incentives to encourage companies to locate or expand in Virginia. Most of them are job creation incentives, and this group includes the Commonwealth's Opportunity Fund, the Agriculture and Forestry Industries Development Fund, and the Major Business Facilities Jobs Tax Credit. Then in November, I will provide our annual overview of state spending on economic development incentives. This report also provides some high-level performance information on grant programs such as job creation and capital investment. I'm also part of a team that will provide a report to you about the Go Virginia program in December. Mark Gribben is the project leader for the study, and I'm giving you the overview today because both Mark and Sam, who's also on the project, are in the midst of getting the SOQ report ready for you in July. Slide 46 provides an overview of the study resolution that you approved directing us to evaluate the effectiveness of the Go Virginia program. The resolution directs us to evaluate a variety of items, including whether regional collaboration has improved because of Go Virginia, whether projects have been successful, and if there is unnecessary overlap between the functions of Go Virginia and other state programs. Go Virginia was created in 2016 to facilitate regional collaboration to grow and diversify the economies of each region in the state. The program is overseen by a state board and administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. The program provides grants to non-regional councils around the state. The program has been appropriated about $30 million each year, which it can use to provide grants to regions for workforce development, site development, business startup, or business and industry scale-up projects. This slide shows the boundaries of the 9 Go Virginia regions. Generally, the boundaries were set by combining planning district commissions, with most regions including at least 2 PDCs. Slide 49 lists the study issues which the team will focus its research on. They include, is Go Virginia achieving its goal to grow and diversify regional economies through collaboration? Is Go Virginia structured and administered effectively to achieve its goal? Are any Go Virginia functions a necessary duplicative of other programs? And what, if any, changes could be made to improve Go Virginia? This slide lists our research activities, which I won't go through, but I'll pause here to address any questions members may have about either our incentive evaluations or our study of the Go Virginia program.
Questions? Yes.
Madam Chair, I asked this question out of ignorance, but are there other agencies or initiatives where people who are not elected officials get to deploy state-collected tax dollars in Virginia?
That is a good question. I know the Tobacco Commission also has members, and legislative members, but it's not general fund dollars specifically.
Gotcha. When I look at that, the appropriateness of Go Virginia funding, that's a question. That's a statement that can take different avenues, but that's one that has occurred to me since the outset of this, the inception of this program. Is that element of it? Will that be part of your study?
Yes, Delegate, we will be looking at, the board, how it functions, is it sort of an appropriate level board? Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll introduce Jamie Bitts now.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Jamie Bitts, and I work with JLARC's ongoing oversight of the Virginia Retirement System, or VRS, Virginia 529, and the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, or VITA. Our oversight of VRS includes an update for you at the July Commission meeting, and you'll also hear from the VRS Director and the Chief Investment Officer at that meeting. And then in December, we'll present to you our full annual oversight report on VRS. We're also conducting a review of enhanced retirement benefits for public safety occupations. Christine Wolf is working with me on this project and will present the findings from that review at the October JLARC meeting. The mandate for this study was passed by JLARC last fall, and it directs us to review the eligibility of public safety occupations for enhanced retirement benefits. We're also directed to assess a range of state and local occupations for enhanced benefits, determine whether it's appropriate to extend enhanced benefits to any additional occupations, and then finally estimate the cost of doing so. Just by way of background, a number of state and local public safety occupations already receive enhanced benefits, and that's typically because of the job-related risks that they face. With the state, this includes state police field troopers. It also includes, for example, correctional officers with the Department of Corrections. And then in terms of local entities, it includes sheriffs and deputy sheriffs, as well as police and other first responders with some localities that have chosen to provide those benefits. The enhanced benefits are more generous, and that's because they can retire with fewer years of service. They often receive a higher monthly amount, and then in some cases they're also receiving what's called a monthly hazardous duty supplement that they'll continue to receive until they're eligible for Social Security. JLARC staff last reviewed this issue in 2008, and in the 15 years since that study, the General Assembly has continued to receive, I think, annual requests for enhanced benefits for additional public safety occupations. And so given that, there's interest in JLARC staff going back and looking at the criteria that were developed in 2008 for deciding when it's appropriate to provide enhanced benefits, and then also determining at the end of the day, are there any additional occupations that should receive enhanced benefits? Madam Chair, this slide shows you the 4 study issues we've developed for the project. First, what, if any, changes are needed to the risk and responsibility criteria that are used to assess eligibility for enhanced benefits? Second, how do state and selected local public safety occupations compare in the risks that they face, as well as in their public safety responsibilities? Third, are there any additional public safety occupations that are justified in receiving enhanced benefits? And then fourth, what would be the cost of providing enhanced benefits to any additional occupations? The primary research activities are listed here on the slide. These include interviews with the occupations that are seeking enhanced benefits, a survey of a broad range of state and local public safety occupations, including those that are already receiving enhanced benefits. And then we're also looking at data on workers' compensation claims to help us kind of gauge the level of risk involved in the various occupations. And I'll pause here, Madam Chair, to take any questions there may be about this particular project.
Questions? Yes, Delegate 9.
Yeah, in the looking at this, I would think maybe hope you would look at the defined benefits versus the hybrid and see how the roll-off is coming as the people attrition out of this thing, if you will, and because that's going to help our sustainability in the future because it isn't quite as costly for the hybrid program. We know that roughly the VRS is $100 billion or so. You know, we as the General Assembly put $1 billion in it, you know, which was good in one respect, but then we lost about $4 billion because of what the interest rate did to us and everything. So we've got to keep an eye on that. But when we went to go visit the bond rating agencies to try to tell them that we're a AAA, you know, state and that we want to maintain that, one of the large components of that was VRS. And you could look at the percent number in there of how it's funded, you know, because of course 65% being too low, you know, and at 100% I don't think we're utilizing our money like we ought to, and I think we're in the mid-80s or so now. We'd like to try to get to the mid-80s because what we're looking at on this thing, the bottom line is we're looking at sustainability on this thing, you know, and to keep our numbers right to the bond rating agencies, and anything that impacts that is what we're going to look at. So.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate. Those are very good points, and those are certainly things that we can incorporate into the study and the things that we're thinking about as we do the research.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
And to follow up on that, to his point of if we expanded in these certain areas, what implications will that have on the rest of the VRS pool of employees? Is it going to require a greater contribution from those to keep the fund sustainable?
Delegate, that's also a good question and a good point, and that'll be a part of the cost valuations that we'll do to estimate essentially the cost of providing enhanced benefits to any additional occupations.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Very briefly, Madam Chair, as you know, JLARC also has ongoing oversight of Virginia 529, and you'll hear an update from Virginia 529's Chief Executive Officer and their Investment Director at the July meeting. And then finally, we also obviously have ongoing oversight of VITA, and so at the November JLARC meeting, we'll give you an update on that agency, and you'll also have a chance to hear from VITA's leadership at that meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll turn it over to Kimberly Sarte again.
Thank you, Jamie. I will briefly touch on the other items under my supervision. Oops. Thank you. So starting with the 2022 session, JLARC began providing racial and ethnic impact statements, which assess the impact on racial and ethnic disparities in the Commonwealth of proposed criminal justice legislation. We completed 3 of these statements during the 2022 session, but we did not receive any requests to complete any sessions in the most recent session. However, we will be prepared to complete these reviews in the 2024 session if we are requested to do so. JLARC also provides a number of fiscal analysis services to the General Assembly. We provide several annual reports related to the state's finances, which are listed here, and Ellen Miller is the lead on a number of these reports. And we also provide fiscal impact reviews. The most common are the second opinions on the fiscal impact of proposed legislation that we provide during the session. And we provided 1 fiscal impact review during the most recent session. Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions about JLARC's ongoing oversight or fiscal analysis services. And if there are none, I'm happy to turn things back over to Hal.
Madam Chair, slide 65 just shows the calendar for the year, which we just talked about. As we've been talking about, we're not having a June meeting. There were just too many conflicts to be able to schedule a June meeting. So our next meeting will be July 10th, and at which time we'll take up the SOQ funding study. We'll also hear from Virginia 529 and VRS at that meeting. And then the final slide just makes the point that several studies have been referred to JLARC for the Commission's consideration. One of those being a study of looking at the cost of higher education. That was Dr. Byron's resolution last year. In talking with the chair, I think the plan will be to have a meeting of our topic selection subcommittee in the fall, and we'll take up all those referred studies as well as other studies that you might want to direct us to take on. And then hopefully out of that subcommittee and the Commission, we'll have directed work for the 2024 year. Be glad to take any additional questions about the work plan or the study selection subcommittee.
Are there questions? Well, then we need a motion to approve the work plan. It's been moved and seconded that the proposed work plan be adopted. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Oh.
Aye.
I'm sorry,
Aye.
I keep forgetting you
Aye.
there
We're good.
somewhere. Okay. Okay, the work plan has been approved.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to now just introduce Stacy Henshaw, the Auditor of Public Accounts. Stacy.
my slides up? Oh, okay.
Good morning, Stacy.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and update you on our office's activities. LaToya Jordan, my deputy for Human Capital and Operations, and Eric Sandridge, my deputy for Technology and Innovation, will be assisting me today in the presentation. One of the things I was going to say when I got up here was when we practiced on Friday, we realized we were a little over our time. And so as we go through our slides today, we plan on skipping through some items. And strategically, I can tell you we don't have a 20-minute hurry-up version. And so I know we're a little late getting started. But we do plan to skip through some items. And so if there's something that you see us skip over that you would like us to cover, please let us know, and we'll stop and answer any questions that you may have. And so we're going to try to make sure that we don't delay you any longer. So today, just an overview of what we're going to cover. LaToya is going to start things off by giving you some updates on our human capital initiatives in our office, as well as an overview of our other strategic initiatives. And then I'm going to go over our proposed 2024 work plan, and then Eric and I will discuss our prior year work plan results. And so at this point in time, I am going to turn it over to LaToya.
Thank you, Stacy. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. And so first, I just want to start by communicating that our office was once again recognized as a top workplace in the Metro Business section of the Richmond Times-Dispatch for the 10th consecutive year. We are proud of this recognition, as we are only one of 9 entities to receive this award since the program began. And so we wanted to take an opportunity to thank our staff for their professionalism, collaboration, engagement, and knowledge that continue to contribute in our ability to receive this award.
Well, I don't think you need to congratulate yourselves. I think we should congratulate you.
Well, we thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. So while we do remain a top workplace, we still face the challenges with recruiting and retention. And our current approved staffing level, which you see reflected in the red bar of 136 positions, 120 which are funded by the general fund, and the remainder being funded by non-general fund sources. It is always our goal to staff to that approved staffing level, but we realize that it's critical for us to maintain stable staffing levels to complete all of our required work each year. If you look at that blue line, we have an average annual turnover rate of about 13%, which has remained somewhat consistent over the past few years. However, some of that stability that you see reflected in that blue line is based on our ability to onboard new professionals as we are losing some of our experienced staff. And so when you think of the productivity that we can achieve from those newer professionals, it is definitely of a lesser degree than those that are seasoned. I would like to point out on a positive note that we are ahead compared to prior year where we were from a recruiting perspective. However, if you look at the average tenure of individuals that are leaving our agency, they are between that 5 to 7 years of experience range. What you will see on the next slide is that some turnover is common in our profession. It always has been, but we do face the additional hurdle of losing staff to other state agencies and area companies that are aware of the caliber of talent that we have at APA. So this next slide here was recently presented at the National State Auditors Association Emerging Leaders Conference, and further highlights some of the challenges we face as it pertains to recruitment and retention in our industry. With accountants exiting the profession and there being a decline in those graduating with accounting degrees, the profession as a whole is seeing an upward trend in hiring individuals without accounting degrees. Even at APA, we are starting to cast a wider net and looking at those students graduating with different business degrees that still require some core accounting courses as part of that core curriculum. And we're also looking outside of the Commonwealth at other institutions of higher education, just because recruiting, the competition at Commonwealth institutions is really fierce these days. And so we're trying to cast a wider net to combat against that. And so while this is helping to mitigate the limited pool of candidates nationwide, it's also contributing to a decline in those sitting for the CPA exam. You can see there that CPA exam candidates are at its lowest since 2007, dropping 29% since 2021. In alignment with our value of knowledge at APA, we still highly promote and support our staff to pursue those external educational endeavors, such as obtaining the CPA designation, pursuing a master's degree, but we also realize that this does make them more marketable to state agency and other businesses in the area. When our staff are leaving our agency for other promotional opportunities, they are receiving compensation adjustments as high as 25%, even at agencies within the Commonwealth. And while we are accustomed to a natural transition of our staff to other state agencies, historically we would see an increase in pay of about 10% and not the premiums that we're seeing here recently. So it is becoming more increasingly difficult for us to compete with those premiums that we're seeing our staff receive when they leave us. So what are we doing to help mitigate our staff leaving and the challenges that we face with recruiting? One, we re-implemented our internship program this past fall. And this internship program, which we do in the fall and in the summertime, is providing students in the Commonwealth professional education and hands-on audit experience, as well as contributing to us building our talent pipeline. I'm proud to say of the 4 individuals that you see listed there on the slide, we were able to offer one a full-time position and they accepted, and so we are excited to have them join us this summer. We are also, again, on track to exceed our prior year recruiting efforts, and we continue to source candidates internally, going to career fairs, using social media professional platforms such as LinkedIn and Handshake, and as well as partnering with Robert Half to just further increase our visibility as a great place to work here in the Commonwealth. The last thing that we did was recently increase our starting salary for our associate auditor position by $1,000. And we were able to do that within our existing budget and approved pay scales. But just as in the prior year when we implemented our compensation plan, we still have to deal with the compression adjustments associated with adjusting our entry-level salary. And so we take that up 3 position levels through our senior auditor position. And so $1,000 may not seem much, but it can add up once you start dealing with compression adjustments. Outside of recruiting, I just want to point out, we realize retention is just as important, and so we are exploring a variety of things to make sure that we retain our staff once we hire them. Salary scales, you have those included in your packets for approval today. They have been adjusted to reflect the 5% increase effective June 10th as approved in Chapter 2 of the 2022 Acts of Assembly. We are requesting additional flexibility to incorporate any subsequent adjustments adopted by the General Assembly related to 2024 compensation. Our salary scales do allow us to provide bonuses to reward exceptional performance, such as passing a professional exam, as well as to promote retention. They also provide us the means to give raises for promotions, as well as merit adjustments based on performance, all in alignment with our compensation plan and budget. This next slide is just a copy of the scales that you have in your packets. And I'm going to skip through, like Stacy mentioned, for the sake of time, our slides related to strategic planning, but just know a full copy of our 2020-2025 strategic plan is located on our website, and we continue to implement different initiatives under each of those directives that you see there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy.
Thank you. And so I will be covering our proposed work plan, and you have a copy of it in front of you in your handouts, and there's a lot of information in here, detailed information about agencies, how much time we spend at certain agencies. I'm not going to go into all that detail today, but the nature of the work that we do at various agencies as well. And so there's a whole lot of additional information that's in the actual work plan document. And so the bulk of the work that we do is to support the audit of the Commonwealth's financial statements, and we call it the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, and also to audit federal funds that the Commonwealth receives, and so that's our single audit. And also the other big driver is our higher education audits, our audits of the financial statements of the four-year institutions in the Commonwealth, and we also do the community college system. And so If we have time left, we use a risk-based approach to determine what to do with that time. Over the years, we've had less and less extra time available, just as we've lost some staff and we've gained hours on other projects. So right now, our work plan is very static from year to year. The who that we audit doesn't change a lot, but the what at those agencies could change depending on their activity. This will demonstrate that we're not really changing a whole lot from the previous year. We're proposing just under 150,000 hours this year. This is down slightly from the prior year. And our audit support projects are up to about 8,200, and that's a 3,000 hour increase. And our audit support projects are not agency-specific work that our office does, but it's productive hours that help support those projects. And so some of those things are required by standards, like we have to have a quality control program in our office. And so that sort of information actually supports the audits, but it doesn't get charged to a specific project. These hours do not include administrative time, so we do have to have a certain amount of educational training every year, especially those of us that are CPAs. And so those administrative time is not included in any of these hours proposed above. This slide is pretty much the highlight of what's going on with our work plan this year and the changes that you'll see. And so we have decreased hours for our cycled agency and special projects. And so these are some of our risk-based projects. And that basically is helping us to balance our work plan because some of the other drivers have gone up, and most notably higher education financial statement audits. They continue to be a driver of our work plan. They're over 50% of our work plan. And there are new standards. They're experiencing the same turnover in their accounting positions that we are, and that results in challenging and auditing them. We've had more findings in those areas. And so one of the things that we did last year to help counter some of that, because we did have the increases, was that we outsourced our NCAA engagements. And so those engagements are required for the universities that participate in NCAA programs. And those are less risky projects. They're not performed under auditing standards. They're performed under something called attestation standards. They're very prescribed by the NCAA. We maintained oversight over that process. We review the reports before they go out the door. And we did keep the 3 largest athletics programs in the Commonwealth, and those are UVA, Virginia Tech, and VCU. So we did retain those NCAA projects. The hours that we are performing related to federal funds continue to be above pre-pandemic level. They are dropping slightly this year as we're out of our busiest year of our cycle, but they still federal funds, pre-pandemic pandemic funds are still being spent, and we're still having to do additional work in that area. We are resuming auditing Virginia 529 beginning with this fiscal year. For the past 5 years, that program has been outsourced to a firm. And the main reason that we did that was my predecessor had an independence issue. She had accounts. And so there were new independent standards that were passed, and it would have prevented her from being able to sign off on the state's financial statements because that program is so significant to the Commonwealth. And so at that point in time, we didn't really have a choice but to outsource it. I don't have accounts. We are seeing a growing trend in our staff and management team that they don't have accounts as well. I know Virginia 529 didn't like it when I presented to them and they heard that, but it just means that we have more capacity in terms of not having issues with independence. And they were the only primary government agency that we did not audit in the Commonwealth. And it created some challenges because of the complexity and the way their financial information rolls up to the state's financial statements. There isn't a one-to-one with their audited financial statements and how it rolls up to the Commonwealth statements because there's differences in presentation. So we found that we were still having to review their activity without the benefit of doing the audit. And it was challenging at times. And so we made the decision to pull that in. We're sourcing that audit with our audit of Virginia retirement system. There's a lot of similarities there. We're using some of the same staff. And so that is, we've met with their board, we've met with the agency on multiple occasions, and we've moved forward with resuming that audit. And the last thing I'll cover here is that increase that we had in the audit support hours is related to the internship program that LaToya talked about. And that actually includes a lot of time that they'll be charging to audit projects, but we made the decision to track our time differently for those and just have them charge all of their time to this internship program, just because we know there's some training items. We did not want to impact our budgets for those programs because we know some of it is they're learning the job basically, and so that really helps balance out the decrease overall and then the increase there. So that was a big overall summary of the changes that we have. And so a lot of this stuff is that it is really just similar from the prior year on this slide. So these are our hours by function. On this slide, I'll touch on independent agencies. That's VRS, lottery, and now Virginia 529 is in there. So we do have the increase related to that. Our local government clerks and courts line there, the local government line is where we do our comparative report of local governments. Is also where we have hours. We go out and do quality control reviews over the firms that do the local audits. It's work that we do at the local level to audit funds they collect on behalf of the state. And it's also the work that we do to audit the Commonwealth's court system. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that 13,000 hours. I think it's 400 and some reports that come out of that because of all the things that we audit with the judicial system. This is a slide to just give you an idea of what we do during the year and how our year looks. And so our work plan year starts in May after you approve our work plan, and it runs through the next April. 56% of the work that we do is for the ACFR and single audit of federal funds. And so that work goes on from May all the way into the beginning of February. In that line, that 56% there, I also have our three big higher education institutions, UVA, Virginia Tech, and VCU, because we have to do them to sign off on the ACFR. Same thing with the retirement system. Once we finish that work, as we have staff rolling off, we start the higher education financial statement audit. So we're trying to wrap up a bunch of them right now. And so that goes on from December all the way into end of June, beginning of July. Then we have our other risk-based projects, our other audits and special projects, and they go on pretty much from February into June. And we have our whole local government and judicial area that pretty much spans the year. And so, as you can see, one thing I'll point out there is that we never have a clean break on our work plan year. So it's not like we finish everything right at the end of April. So we do have audits that kind of bleed over into the next work plan year, which gets us a little bit behind in starting our other projects. This slide is just showing you the hours we spend on the executive branch, and obviously it's the bulk of our work plan. I've already communicated that the big driver here is our higher education institutions. They're over 50%. They have, in total, our executive hours went up by 1,600 hours this year. And really the driver there is higher ed went up. They went up 1,600 hours, but you have to also think about the fact we pulled 4,000 hours out for NCAA. So our higher ed audits actually went up about 6,000 hours. And so that's a mix of things. We've got a research and development federal program in cycle this year. And then we've had some issues at some of the schools, like I said, with turnover and implementing new standards, and so we've right-sized some of our budgets there. A big increase this year was between UVA and UVA Medical Center. We have about 1,000 additional hours we'll be spending there, and Eric's going to talk about them a little bit later. And then also VCU has about 730 additional hours in this year. The only other thing I'll mention is that finance has a slight decrease, and that is in the single audit area, and that is because we are in a lower year of our cycle for how we cover the federal work. And so most of our hours for single audit are spread out in the various agencies, but we keep some within the single audit project for things that maybe might come into cycle because of risk or because they'll reach the dollar threshold late in the year. And so we have less hours built in for that this year. So cycled agencies, this is a group, a whole lot of agencies are in here, about 70 agencies, but they don't have a mandatory audit requirement. They don't usually support the Act for a single audit. And so a few years back, we created this process, and it's a risk-based process. We divide those agencies into pools, and that's how we go about auditing them. There's a lot of information on those agencies on pages 6 and 7 of your work plan. I'll check that just to make sure I'm communicating that correctly to you. Yes. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I will say that there's less time here this year. And that is because first of all, we needed to save some time. So we pulled out, we usually have a Pool 1 special project. We've done that special project for 5 years now, and so we're giving ourselves a break. And that special project would cover one particular area, and we would go to multiple agencies and review it. So we did payroll 1 year, and we did information system security another year. And so this year we've left that out to just give us a little more capacity in our work plan. And then with our Pool 2 agencies, that's where we go into agencies and actually do audit work over a particular area. There are just less hours in there because a lot of those agencies we've been in for several years, we've had a lot of findings, and they haven't had a chance to fix those. And so instead of going in and just saying you still have issues, we're trying to allow them time to correct those issues. One thing I did want to bring up, and I know the Opioid Abatement Authority came up earlier, and so you'll notice they have, we've added them this year as a Pool 1 agency. And so even though they're a Pool 1 agency, which means they're not slated for a specific audit, we have been working very closely with them. Early on, we started getting a lot of questions from localities that had started receiving the opioid abatement funds about how to account for them and report them in their financial statements. And so at that time, we reached out to the Government Accounting Standards Board and worked with them and the Opioid Abatement Authority. And we wanted to make sure that for the Commonwealth, there was consistency and that the localities as well as state agencies were properly reporting this information. And so we provided guidance to them. Our office actually led a national conference call to go over the reporting and guidance because this was not on a lot of radar on the radar of a lot of state and local government entities. And so, and it actually resulted in an adjustment at the state level in their financial statements. So this area, I'm going to skip through a lot of slides, but our special projects have not changed a lot from year to year. They're recurring. There's information on them on pages 8 and 9 of the work plan report. And so the main thing I'm going to cover here is our new project. And that is a review of VITA's Enterprise Cloud Oversight Service, or ECOS. And that project, as you know, a lot of people are moving to the cloud. And so we just want to make sure that, making sure there's good oversight over this. Process and service is very important for the Commonwealth because so many agencies have cloud-based services. And so with this, we plan to look at what VITA, their oversight and management of the vendors that provide those services to executive branch agencies. We also want to make sure that VITA is providing consistent and effective guidance to agencies and are doing with the service what was expected when it was created in the budget. And then finally, we're going to make sure that they maintain effective communication with agencies regarding the services, so to ensure the Commonwealth is effectively assessing and addressing any risk with cloud applications. So I did move through that very fast, and so this concludes an overview of our work plan, and so I will pause for any questions.
Are there questions?
It might not have felt like I was moving through it very fast, but I was trying.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator McPike.
Thank you. I do have one brief question in regards to the distressed localities work. And obviously in your work plan, you've highlighted a few localities that seem to be languishing, not just from one submission, but multiple years. That's
Yes.
impacting their bond rating and some other things going on.
Yes.
What's the feedback from these entities? I mean, this is a really important question, and I'm glad that the General Assembly put forward legislation to help identify it. I think the question is, we have it, what do we do now? I mean, there's some real struggles that are happening.
Right, and so I do have some slides on that. And I don't know if we want to approve the work plan, and then I can get into that, and you can. It will show the extent of some of the issues that are out there, and it is growing. I'll just tell you, the issues are growing. It's not just Hopewell anymore. You've got other localities that are late that have not been late before, and so we can talk about some of the things. There is some proposed language to account for some of the changes there, and so if we wanted to go ahead and get approval of our
Madam Chair,
work.
I move the adoption of the work plan.
It's been moved and seconded that the work plan be adopted. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. I'm waiting for
Aye.
on high.
Aye. Yes, ma'am. I apologize.
Are there any negatives? Okay.
So we also had our salary scales, if we could have approval of that as well.
This has raised some questions
Oh,
up here.
okay.
Because one would think this would be in the budget, but apparently in the past, according to Hal, we've actually done this. So, yes.
You're right, it does come in a budget. It looks to me like it falls under, like when we have constitutionals that want salary increases and all this kind of stuff. So it does depend on the budget and the general fund and available resources. And I know that it takes a lot of money to keep CPAs there, just like it takes a lot of money for the previous presenter on lawyers and public defenders and all that kind of stuff. So for that reason, I'll have to abstain on this vote.
Anyone else? Okay. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And,
Aye, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Delegate Knight and I are abstaining.
Okay, moving on to our prior year work plan results. Once again, I'm starting with some highlights of what I'm going to discuss today. And so the one thing I'm going to talk about is delays in getting information from localities and how this has impacted our office and our ability to issue the local comparative report. I know I've reported delays to you last year, and they've only gotten worse. I'm also going to talk to you about Hopewell, and this year we qualitatively identified them as being fiscally distressed. And then Eric is going to talk to you about some of our ACFR and single audit findings, and so we did have an increase in that area this year. I am happy to say, though, that despite having the stresses on our work plan and additional federal money that we audited, we still remain one of the top states for getting our single audit completed. We were the third to upload ours this year. One state beat us by one day, but the other two states that uploaded before us had significantly less federal funds than we did. They had $10 billion and $20 billion to our $30 billion. So we were auditing a lot more funds than they were. For the first time that we can remember or that we're aware of in our office, we issued a disclaimer of opinion on a federal program, and that was the rental assistance program at housing. And that just meant we couldn't get enough audit evidence to support giving an opinion on that. And Eric's going to talk about that a little bit more. We also successfully navigated our work plan stress caused by multiple higher education reaccreditation reviews. We had 4 four-year institutions in cycle and 3 two-year institutions, and that meant we just had to compress and be able to get those projects out sooner because they had deadlines, and we were able to successfully do that. And then we're also pleased to be able to say we've issued our second higher education comparative report this year. And so we think this report is a useful tool in looking at the financial health of our public institutions in the Commonwealth. And so our comparative report, we published our draft on February 15th, and we were missing data from 40 localities at that time. That is a lot. And so last year there were 27 localities that were missing. And so basically 23% of the 170 localities that report to us did not have information to us by February 15th. When that happens, it delays us because we do analytical procedures over the work that, over the information they provide to us, and so it just means it pushes us back in terms of being able to do our work. We do expect to issue our final report by the end of this month, and so we've reached the point now where if someone submits something to us, it's not going in there because we have to have a cutoff date and time to, we can't just keep accepting one and one because it just keeps pushing it. And so at a later date, we will amend the report and pull in the localities that came to us after our cutoff date, which was last week. So currently, there are 19 localities that have not submitted information to our office. Last year, this time, there were only 12. And so that's a 58% increase. You can see who they all are up here. I know last year there was some discussion about what we can do about this. And I mentioned the only thing that's out there right now is there's a requirement if you're late, you're supposed to kind of own up to it and put on your website that you're late and why you're late. And so only 12 of the 19 localities that are currently late have not posted this information on their website. We have had communications with some of those localities and some of their auditors, so we know the reasons for that, but they're currently not in compliance with the code with regard to posting that information on their website. And so you've heard a lot today about the accounting industry and turnover in those positions. It's really spreading everywhere. A lot of the things that we're going to talk to you today that are problems are because of that. So a lot of them have experienced turnover and unable to fill those positions and unable to get qualified people in those positions. They're having retirements. People are leaving the accounting profession in general. And so all of this is spilling over into state and local government and causing a big issue. And so I know that state CPA societies and ASCPA, everybody's trying to bring more people into the profession right now, but it's been really difficult. And we're really starting to see that a lot. So when you ask about issues, that's a significant issue. Standards are also a significant issue. This year, the big thing was leases. And so in the Commonwealth, we had to report, we used to have operating leases and capital were in your statements and operating were not. Now everything goes into your statements. It was a significant change. It took a lot of time for that to happen. And there is what I would call standards overload. And we communicate that every time we get a chance to the standard setting bodies that there is a breaking point for governments, especially because we're leaner in terms of those positions, and a lot of entities are getting close to that in terms of being able to report. And so there's going to have to be a decision made about timely reporting or putting everything that you can into the financial statements. And I think that's one of the challenges right now. And so as one thing I will point out is we have one locality that we have not had any communication with that is late, and that is Clifton Forge. And so the town of Clifton Forge has not, their auditor hasn't reached out to us, and they have not responded to any of our inquiries, so we really have no idea what's going on there. This just shows, this is another way of looking at it. Our original filing deadline, the statutory deadline, is December 15th. We had 95 localities that met that, but that meant that 75 did not. So that's 44% of the Commonwealth's localities missed that statutory deadline. And so, which is pretty significant. It's an increase last year, 57 did not meet it. And so it's really growing, and it's a trend that, as you can see the lines, that less and less are able to meet that. Hopewell has not submitted financial statements since they've submitted their fiscal year 2018 statements. So they're missing statements for 19, 20, 21, and 22. That's 4 years worth of financial data that has not been provided to our office. And I'm going to talk about them some more in a minute. I've got some slides specifically on them. Petersburg was late getting their 2021 financial statements to us, but they have not sent us their transmittal data yet for 2021. So that means they're not in our existing, compared report that's out there for 2021. And they are one of the localities that's late for 2022 as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on off of comparative report to our local fiscal distress model. And so as long as there are no questions from that perspective. And I'm not going to go over the model itself a lot. It hasn't changed. We do a ratio analysis and a qualitative review. I'm just going to talk about our results for last year. And so our 2022 monitoring is based on fiscal year 2021.
Okay.
Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to follow up with what Senator McPike mentioned, because I found that troubling as well, and clearly you do. And I heard you say there are two principal reasons. One is the challenge in finding appropriate staff for localities in the area of accounting, and then the increasing workload with standards that have. Are there any other factors to which this is attributable? Are those really the ones that?
Those are the two primary ones. We also have, there are other factors that will be reported to us periodically, and I jotted some of these down. Some of them, systems implementation issues, and so that's what started Hopewell down this path, is they implemented a new system and they never caught up. COVID, some of them still say COVID-related issues kind of got them behind and they've had trouble catching up. Another issue, some of them have had cybersecurity attacks. If they don't have good security over their systems, if they get ransomware and it shuts them down, that I know happened at least one of the localities. And then sometimes some of our localities have trouble getting information from the entities that feed up into their financial statements. So they may have what we call component units, the Commonwealth has those as well. And a lot of times those entities don't get their financial information in timely, and that slows things up too. So there are some other factors, but overwhelmingly the two things that we hear of is staffing and standards. And like I said, we try to help to the extent possible. Our local government manager sends out information on new standards. When we have the opportunity, like we did with opioid abatement, to take the lead in that, we actually provided audited numbers, financial data to them for that, so they could look it into their financial statements, because we found out we could audit it centrally and gather that information. So whenever we have the opportunity to help them, we do. We only have 2 people in our local government area, and so we don't have a lot of capacity there either, but we do try to help to the extent possible. I know my local government manager's here today, Rachel, and she does presentations a lot and is out there fielding questions all the time, but it is something that is very concerning to us. And like I said, I've communicated that. I work with several groups that work with GASB and provide information to them, and I'm constantly saying we need to slow down. Look, governments need a chance to kind of catch their breath. They are proposing a whole rewrite to the financial reporting process, like we had 20 years ago, and I think it's a hard time to do that right now with the accounting industry the way that it is. They are proposing adding information that's never been in there before, and changing how roads are presented in the financial statements that will cause what I believe is a lot of additional effort for our cities that have have roads and the state. And so there's just a lot of things. It's a scary, you would never think the accounting profession would be a scary profession, right? But it is right now.
Well, being married to one, I get what you mean. But I thank you, Madam Chair, for this, because it's troubling to see.
Delegate Knight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've been hearing this for years and years. We actually had, I think, a community we was through in receivership, and the state had to go in there and take them over and everything. And I think I can probably speak for the chairman of finance over here also, and to tell you, if you would, and your local government lady, that if we don't know how our money, the state's money, is being allocated and spent on some of these certain communities, we may not want to give them as much as they're asking for. So I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you, if you have a problem with these folks, just like we as individuals can ask for an extension on filing our taxes, these folks can pick up the phone and they can call y'all, because you can't do your job unless they do that and notify y'all. So please notify us or our staff down here if these folks aren't being cooperative. And if they're not going to be cooperative with us, we may not be cooperative with them.
And one thing I'll say is that I know even just last week, we've had some outreach with Virginia Municipal League, and we're going to work on outreach with the Virginia Association of Counties too, just to have some partnerships in terms of outreach with some of these localities and trying to be able to get some of that information in more timely.
As the Municipal League reports to its members, I just want to say to what Delegate Knight said, ditto.
So with our 2022 annual monitoring process, we identified 2 new localities that, based on our ratio analysis, that we initially had some concerns about. And so we identified them for follow-up review, and that was the city of Radford and the town of Clifton Forge. So one of our friends that we haven't heard from this year. And then we continued to qualitatively evaluate the city of Hopewell during that process. And I know last year I talked about Buena Vista, and so we continued to follow up with them. Our report that has all of this information I'm going over, it will be issued here in the next few weeks. And so we'll have more detail in that. City of Radford, we identified some concerns looking at their ratios, and so we sent them a letter in September. They responded to us very quickly. In October, they had completed their financial assessment questionnaire, and they had requested to participate in our follow-up process. We met with them. They were very responsive. They went over their plans for improving their financial position, and based on that process, we did not identify them as being fiscally distressed. Clifton Forge, we once had some concerns about their ratio analysis, and we communicated with them back in September, and they did send us a completed financial assessment questionnaire, but they did not request to participate in our follow-up process. So at that point, we really can't do a lot without being able to talk to them and hear about their plans in terms of being able to address the issues that we're noting. And so we'll just continue to monitor them for future ratio trends and other qualitative factors, but that's going to be really hard if they don't get their financial statements in. And so because they're not in right now, we really won't have any new information to provide related to those. Last year, when I was here, I talked about Buena Vista. We had had pretty much radio silence. We had identified them and hadn't heard anything from them. And after this meeting, after the meeting last year, they contacted us. They gave us a completed financial assessment questionnaire. They did not request to participate with further follow-up discussions, but because we were able to get subsequent financial reports and do additional ratio review, we were able to say that we did not identify them as being fiscally distressed. And the big thing with Buena Vista was their golf course. And that golf course, so the golf course, they were in default on their debt for that golf course. That has all been settled. They've settled in terms of the debt that they owe there. The golf course is out of operations, out of state, local operations, and I believe a private entity has now taken that over. So we really expect to see them to continue to improve from their financial performance. So then we have Hopewell. Hopewell we've probably talked to you about Hopewell for 5 years now. It's been going on for a while, so this is nothing new. And since 2016, so almost seven years now, they've been delayed in submitting their financial statements to us. And so because of that, we can't run them through our ratio analysis. And so we get the analysis and it's late, and we'll kind of do it after the fact. And so the first few years, they were kind of hanging at about 2 years late, and they would eventually submit their financial statements. And like I said, when we would run them through the ratio analysis, they looked okay. This has really been a different situation than what we saw at Petersburg and Bristol, where we were seeing strong financial indicators of financial issues. where Petersburg was having cash flow issues and Bristol was having issues as well, that were truly financial in nature. And so, you know, the inability to produce financial statements is not something that was really envisioned when we came up with this model for monitoring. And so, because it's based on the fact of us being able to run ratios based on financial information sent to us. So when a locality does not do that, the model doesn't really work when we don't have that information. And so we did, I know the administration had some communications with us concerning Hopewell, and we did communicate to them that we felt like this was something that was an issue with the model. And so they asked us to provide some language to update some budget language to update the model somewhat, and that we did provide that language. And so basically, there's a notification, and I think Delegate Knight, this is what you're leading to, that once someone is 18 months late in submitting financial statements to our office, we're going to send out a letter, and everybody hears about it. And so quite a few, you know, and then at that point in time, the money committees and the administration have the ability to use that state assistance that's there. But prior to that, it was really hard to say they were fiscally distressed because they were still, we didn't hear they weren't paying their bills like we had heard in Petersburg, and we didn't hear they were about to default on debt. It's just that they have not been able to produce financial statements. So this year, one of the reasons that we identified Hopewell is that when they provided us their fiscal year 2018 financial statements, we noticed they had a disclaimer on them. So it basically meant, and it's on the entire set of financial statements, that the auditor could not give an opinion on their financial statements. So it really wasn't, it's basically saying, here's this document, but we can't tell you it's right. And that was the first time they had a whole disclaimer on their entire set of financial statements. They had had some units that had that, but not to this degree. And so, and at this point in time, they're 4 years behind too. So it's not even, it just has continued to get worse. And so we submitted a letter to them. They agreed to participate in our review process. They completed the questionnaire. And we reviewed the questionnaire and met with the city finance director to review the factors that are contributing to their financial and operational issues. And here are some of those items. They don't have a bond rating right now because you can't have a bond rating if you don't have financial statements. Like I said, they received a disclaimer of opinions. They have multiple material weaknesses in internal controls and financial reporting. They've been there for years now, and they haven't been resolved. We also noted some other unfavorable trends, like unfavorable trends in demographic factors such as unemployment and poverty rates that, like I said, were unfavorable. They have a high fiscal stress ranking in the analysis that the Commission on Local Government performs. They're not providing additional funding, or there's been a decline in their ability to provide additional funding above the state's required amount for education costs. And just other things that we noted, other internal factors such as not having resources and expertise to do financial reporting, their organizational structure, and just overall control environment. So based on all of this, in December, we issued a letter formally recommending the governor and money committees consider providing state assistance to Hopewell to help them figure out what issues that they had and develop a plan to address those issues. And so in early 2023, the assistance was provided. The Secretary of Finance office has went through a search to hire an external firm, and they did so in March. Our office met twice with the external consultant to give them background information, history, anything that we could provide to help with the process. And they issued their report in late April. Last week, the Secretary of Finance and the firm met with Hopewell City Council and went over the results of their review. While Hopewell was appreciative of the report and the review, they are also disappointed. And I watched the city, I wasn't able to attend the city council meeting, but did watch the replay of that. And so I think they're Their expectation was that the state was going to take a little more of a lead in actually coming in and fixing the issues versus just providing information on a plan for that. And so I know that the secretary reported that, they are open to continuing dialogue and providing input in the process. But at that point that, what the plan was, to do in terms of helping them has been completed. And so now it's kind of the ball's in their court for being able to get themselves through this.
Would you think that part of the problem is some of these jurisdictions are simply too small? They don't have enough population to provide the services needed.
I mean, they definitely...
to me, and I'm leaving, but this is something that needs to be grappled with over the next few years. Do we have the right number of jurisdictions? What sort of population should they have?
Right. I mean, I know I'm from that area, the Tri-Cities, so we do have 3 cities that are close together there. And so... And one thing I will say that for the most part, we haven't heard a lot about service providing. And so I know when Petersburg was having their issues, the citizens were talking about not getting water bills correctly and being billed twice for their real estate taxes and those types of things. So we're not hearing that as much as at Hopewell. We haven't seen that like we did when Petersburg was having their issues. So it seems like from a service provider that you're not. I know there's some things that they haven't done with their water and sewer area. And so in terms of providing rebates to businesses, but it's right now it seems to be they just can't pull together those statements. And I'm going to be honest with you, at some point we said, maybe you should just forget about the last 3 and just focus on getting financial statements as of today. Go talk to your federal agencies, the federal cognizant agencies, because you are required to have an audit to get federal funds, but say, we have a plan and this is how we want to catch up. We want to just focus on figuring out our balances and just starting fresh and using that time versus going back and creating these reports that are 5 years old or 4 years old. And so I guess there hasn't been a lot of appetite, but I know that's something that we recommended. We said, when you're that far behind, it's really hard to catch up. And maybe you just have to figure out, I mean, you can do work to substantiate your cash balances, find out what your debt is. And so your balance sheet, you can figure those numbers out. And then working to basically get your processes in place to make sure that you don't have these issues again in the future. And so that is just something that our office, like I said, recommended that they could look into. They would have to get approval to do that from their federal cognizant agencies, but and the state would have to buy into that as well. But right now, it's pretty overwhelming to think that they could go back and catch up for 4 years of delays. And let's face it, fiscal year 2023 ends in 6 weeks from now. And so, and then once again, you're dealing with another year of financial statements. If there are no further questions from me, Eric is going to quickly cover our remaining items there. So.
Sorry, just a question about salaries, jumping back to that. Is there, and this might have been somewhere printed, but what's the comparison between, say, private salary of CPA and what the state is offering? Is there a big difference there? What is that?
We're comparable to that. I mean, so we're not, there's not a huge difference there. And it's really hard when you're looking at salary because the scales are so, like they'll give you a wide range. And so I think we're below that for sure. And upward mobility is less in our office, we have a limited number of management positions, and so we did try to address that a couple years ago when we came and asked for some additional funding, and we created another position in our office. But what happens is our staff move up so quickly, and then there's nowhere for them to go. And so really the main thing in terms of getting salary compensation is to get merit increases, but we're not a lot below the private sector. But I think the point that LaToya made earlier, and we have always felt like we are glad to provide accounting staff to the Commonwealth. We really are. I mean, if you go to any state agency out there, you're going to find an APA employee in their finance area. And that's always been something that's no different. But I guess we're having a hard time competing with other state agencies right now because they are paying a premium for our staff. And so when LaToya said 25%, I mean, people are that's a pretty big increase to leave our office and go to another state agency and get 25 to 30% more. And so that's where there's a big difference there right now. And
Thank you. Madam Chairman, maybe, a quote of the actual figures.
So
what state is paying, what private is paying? Approximately. Back of the envelope.
Do you know that? And what we could do is we could pull together some information that there's data, like Robert Half posts data on, and so it depends on the size of the entity and that sort of thing. I think our starting salary right now is 53. Is it were we seeing like 56 and for other entities? And so different places handle the CPA differently. when you pass the CPA exam, you get a $4,000 salary increase, and then a year later you get another $3,000, because we had people that were getting their initial and then they were leaving. They're so marketable at that point. So we trying to stretch that out a little bit. Some places you get a bonus and you don't get the increase, but it's kind of worked into your overall compensation over time. And our positions are a little bit different than private sector positions, but we have data and we can provide some additional data on that and provide it to the members just to show some of the analysis that we've done in that area.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I'm going to keep this as brief as I can because I know we're well over time at this point. And so we've talked a lot about local government. I wanted to touch briefly on results from some of our state mandated work. We have our state financial statement work, that's the ACFR work, and our single audit of federal funds. We did have an increase in total number of findings in our single audit report this year at 111 findings. That was about a 20% increase from the prior year. We're still seeing a lot of increase related to spending of pandemic-related funds. That funding came in so fast. So we had a lot of agencies that saw a big increase in findings during that time, trying to get those funds out the door. Health and Human Resources Secretariat is still the big driver of findings in that report with about 60. It was 60% of the 60 findings were repeat findings from the prior year. And we had 13 material weaknesses this year as part of that process. That's essentially the worst category of internal control deficiency. 6 of those relate to financial reporting. So about 50% of those are financial reporting, either their ability to pull together financial reporting. We also had 2 in there that were related to lease accounting, which was the new standard for this year. 2 were IT security, and then 5 in federal grants compliance. As Stacy mentioned, complexity has been a big driver of that. If you look at the material weaknesses by entity, social services had 3, health had 2. We had 2 at housing and community development, which related directly to that disclaimer of opinion that we had on that federal program. And then we had 1 at a handful of other agencies. One of the things that we have been doing, the administration's been asking us for more information about findings and whether they've been resolved. There is a lag between when agencies say those recommendations have been resolved and when we go validate that those recommendations have been resolved. So we've been providing information quarterly to the administration just to say these are the open recommendations so they can follow up with their agencies and try to get those remedied. And that's quarterly process at this point. As we look at kind of the primary findings that we have, you can kind of divide them up into two areas. There's IT-related and non-IT, and it's about a 50-50 split for the single audit this year. Grants management was the big area in terms of those non-IT recommendations. Then you have some human resources and payroll issues, financial accounting and reporting, and third-party service providers. Stacy mentioned we're doing that special project on VITA's ECOS process, which will kind of help to get at that third-party service provider issue a little bit. In terms of IT issues, there's a lot of control families here. It kind of runs across the board, but this has been an ongoing thing for us. Information security is usually a large driver of the recommendations that we see. And that, again, it's hard to retain talent in information security. Some of our smaller agencies particularly have a hard time in retaining information security officers and those qualified personnel. And it's a heavy compliance area as well. The security standard is pretty big for the Commonwealth, and so we do continue to see this as a problem area going forward. Just briefly to touch on this graph, the three sets of bars here are kind of our work plan related to federal funding. So first set of bars is the baseline pre-pandemic. If you imagine, these are the number of programs we audit over a 3-year period. So the number of hours is roughly the same. Some programs are bigger than others to audit. But if you look, that blue bar is steadily increasing. And that's our base year. That's number of programs. And so the pandemic and the spending on that, our audit process lags spending, right? It's a historical-based look at spending. And so you can see it has been a big driver of our work plan increases, that 2022 bar, and then where we see we're going to be estimated in 2023. Normally, we would see, these programs decrease, and we do have a decrease from 2022, but significantly above that baseline of where we were 5 years ago or 6 years ago in 2017. Talking about higher ed financial statements, just briefly, as Stacy mentioned, we had 4 earlier audits this year, so we've completed 7 of the 2022 audits. More are wrapping up right now, including VCCS. We did have 3 material weaknesses at higher education institutions this year, which is somewhat unusual. We have had them before. 2 years ago, we had one at Virginia State. We've had them at Longwood and Richard Bland in the past, but this year we had one at ODU, one at Mary Washington, and one at the University of Virginia. And just to touch on the University of Virginia one a little bit, Stacy mentioned additional hours in our work plan there. UVA is pretty large. They do a lot of complex things. This year they had a fairly unique situation where their medical center acquired another hospital system, which is a very highly complex transaction, and certainly in the governmental accounting world, a very unusual transaction. And so what we found in that situation was that they hadn't necessarily accounted for that in the right way. They had to bring in some additional specialists late in the audit process to revalue that transaction and account for it properly. And it did result in significant delays in that audit. We were working on the UVA audit the same day that we signed off on the state's financial statements on December 15th. So UVA has committed to us and to their board that they're going to invest more resources in financial reporting because as things have gotten more complex, the size of that staff and the number of resources haven't necessarily kept pace. So we've seen that they either stayed the same or decreased while complexity has continued to ramp up. This is the number of findings by institution. I don't want to go into this in detail. They've remained roughly the same by institution on a year-to-year basis. We had, 2 institutions that didn't have any recommendations this year, all the way up to one that had 18 and so on. Like I said, some of those represent 2021 as those 2022 audits are wrapping up. Again, this is findings by area. So for higher ed, it's not much different than the state. Information security is a big driver. Federal student aid, another area highly complex. And so we see a lot of issues there when we audit those processes. For our community colleges, and we go to 2 every year, Tidewater, Northern Virginia, they're the biggest. We look at their shared services center, their system office, and then we do a risk-based approach and look at the remaining institutions over several years. Nothing overall too concerning on this slide in terms of number of findings, but if you look at that report, it is a very large report because of the number of institutions that are included, obviously. And the same three primary drivers of issues: information security, federal student aid, and human resources and payroll. I did want to touch briefly on our comparative report for higher ed. Stacy mentioned this was our second report. It catches us up through fiscal year 2020. There is a little bit of a timing lag between when we can issue our report, so you'll note that this data is only valid through 2020, and that's because we're waiting on audited data. So we have to finish our audits, then put together this analysis. We have talked about perhaps using unaudited data in the future. We still have to have some more conversations with the institutions about that, but they're basically, the way this report works, we've grouped the institutions into cohorts, so 3 big classifications. We did include some comparison to other states in the raw numbers in the back. One thing I'll point out, and just kind of an overall point on this, is that our master's or baccalaureate institutions are the ones that are significantly more resource constrained, as you might expect. We do a composite ratio called the Composite Financial Index. This isn't something we designed. It's something that's been out there in the higher ed world for some time, but it basically takes 4 ratios, combines them together to produce a composite. So this graph just shows you the composite ratio by grouping. These are our big research institutions. That blue bar shows you what their ratio looks like once you add their foundation resources in. And the reason you have to do that, there's differences in how institutions handle their endowments. Some, their foundations primarily hold the endowments. Others, the institution holds them themselves. So that's why you see UVA doesn't show much of a difference between the institution on a standalone basis and with their foundation, whereas, say, a VCU or Virginia Tech shows a significant increase. And it all has to do with how they handle that endowment-related balance. If you look at our middle classification here, this is the high research or the doctoral professional institutions. All are above the benchmark when you add the foundation resources, except JMU. JMU doesn't have quite the size of the endowment that some of these others do, but their ratios have steadily improved over time, so nothing too concerning there either. And then if you look at our master's and baccalaureate classification, this is where you see the biggest disparity. VMI has one of the largest endowments per student in the country, very close to what UVA has. And so they obviously are significantly above the benchmark ratio. The other institutions are all below, even when you add in their foundation resources. And the one I really want to highlight here is Mary Washington, because you can see there's actually declines when you add their foundation. Now, this is kind of an ongoing issue that we've known about, but the foundation had a lot of assets that were essentially not doing very well, not performing very well, a lot of debt related to those assets, and so they actually had a negative net position for a little while. And so if you look at the trend over time, you can see most of the institutions here that are below the ratio, below that benchmark ratio are relatively flat with a slight increase in 2020. That increase actually is somewhat ironically related to the pandemic funding that came in. We thought maybe financial performance would be worse, but it actually improved a little bit because of the timing of all of that in the last quarter of 2020. But Mary Washington shows that steady decline. Now, talking to the institution, their ratios on an individual institution basis without the foundation have improved slightly. So it's a little bit of an interesting situation. It's a different situation than what our other institutions of higher ed have. Mary Washington has done some things over the last few years. They purchased some housing assets from the foundation that went through state approval. They took on some debt to do that. And the foundation has sold off some assets that weren't doing well. So they're trying to clean that up, but they just lack the expendable resources that a lot of our bigger institutions have. And it really shows up here in how they're performing in terms of the ratio. So that was very quick, but I would be happy to take any questions. That's the end of our presentation, and we appreciate you listening to us for so long.
Thank you. Questions? Apparently not. Hal, you have some parting words for us.
Just a few, Madam Chair. Thank y'all for hanging in so long. That concludes our agenda. Our next meeting, as we discussed, will be Monday, July the 10th. Really want to thank you for your attention and for your valuable input today on our studies. So thank you very much.
Okay, there being no further business, we're adjourned.